Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Sencha Cafe. This is Stephen Ball here. I'm just going to be moderating and hosting through today. Joining me online as always is our MVP Stuart Ashworth. Morning Stuart.
Morning Stephen, morning everyone.
So we've had a lot of really good feedback about this series of webinars. So if you're kind of dropping into this one partway through, this is kind of part 4. We've been building an email client from scratch, a bit like Google Mail, using the classic framework from Sencha. And this week we're going to be moving on and getting into looking at how to use the modern framework and reutilizing the code that we have already built, which is, it's code that's working, it's tested, and we've got all that stuff ready to go, and being able to use that now onto the kind of the modern frameworks that allows us to have a much more adaptable UI ready for mobile and other types of devices to run through. So before we get in, just a couple of quick poll questions as we are live, and just help guide this as we go through. So as always, which best describes your use of Sencha? You're not using it yet, actively trialing it, using it in development, or using it in development and production? So good split so far between those who are looking at it and looking to get into the trial, and also who have got it up in production as well. So good split across the board here. In fact, we're just edging out in front now, the development and in production. So okay, that's great. Thank you guys. And let's have a quick check here now, which version you're using currently. So you're on Sencha 7, which is the latest version. Sencha 6, which was about 2.5 years ago now, so you really need to be looking to make sure you get moved up to Sencha 7 to get the latest support. If you're on Sencha 5 or earlier, then again, definitely recommend getting upgraded to the latest versions. If you do feel that you need some help and support or some guidance in terms of what to do to help move forward, then please feel free to reach out to Patricia Penn, who you should have your email for registering for these sessions, and we're more than happy to kind of set you up with an hour of Stuart's time just to talk through your project and see if we can help get you set forward in the right foot to get your projects move forward. Okay, great. And finally, one extra question for this week. For those of you who are already using Sencha, are you using classic only, modern, or are you using both? So just over half of you are using both, and a relative about 20% on modern, just under 20% on classic, but the lion's share of you using both frameworks. Okay, great. Super. I'll close that one there, and I'll hand over to Stuart to get into the main events.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Welcome everyone to this morning's session. As Stephen said, we're going to be talking about the modern toolkit of XJS this morning, and carrying on from our email client application that we built in the last few weeks, and now we're going to, which was built with the classic toolkit, and now we're going to build a modern toolkit interface for it, building on the sort of back-end code, if you like, the data stores and repositories and the business logic that we've got already going on. So let me just, if you see on the screen, there's some links to the application code which you can view online. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of problem getting the modern app that we're going to build this morning up there just now, but hopefully check back later on and it will be there. But I'll demo it just now, and you can get the code from the GitHub repo as well. So first of all, let's show you what we're gonna build today. So this is just to return to what we were doing before. So this is the application that we built in the last few weeks. It's just a recap for people that maybe weren't there. So basically, it's a clone of Google Mail type thing, and we've got a tree view on the side with the labels. We've got a list of messages which can be starred and viewed and deleted, and we can browse our folders and compose messages using the form down here. So that's what we've got so far, and obviously we've got a lot of code already there to back up the interface, if that makes sense. We've got a lot of data stores, we've got the models, we've got the loading of data from the back end, all working. So we're going to take advantage of that and just build on top of it, and with the modern toolkit, and build a new interface using the modern toolkit, which will be shown or available to particularly to touch screens and phones and that sort of thing. So this is what we're going to try to get to. If I show this over here. So very similar to what you'd expect. We've got a list of messages. We've got a menu bar with the folders that we can scroll through and browse, and we can tap into each message. And we've got a few actions at the top in the toolbar, and we can navigate back to that to the main list. And so this is what we're going to try to get to today. We'll hopefully at least get the messages list sorted and the details screen. We might have to keep the labels navigation menu for next week, and the compose functionality, which is still to come. So that's what we're going to aim to do today. Hopefully you can follow on. As Stephen said, there's question section in the webinar software. If there's anything that comes up as we go, feel free to jot it down there, and I'll keep a wee eye, or Stephen can shout if there's something that comes up that would like to be answered as we go. Otherwise, we'll have a wee bit of time at the end to go over any questions and answer any queries that have come up. So what we're going to do is we'll close this down. In fact, let's just talk it up here. We can get rid of this and get rid of that. So this is our application at the moment. So to launch the modern toolkit view, we can simply open DevTools and click this little button here, which basically emulates a device. So we can choose a different device. I've just chosen Pixel 5, and that will, when you do that, the browser will send to make it known that it's a touch device effectively, and then XJS will say, right, it's a touch device, let's go to the modern framework application. So at the moment it's given us an error and it's blank. So what we're going to do is start that the process of developing it, and we'll get rid of all these errors. So just another note, we've got a Sencha app watch modern command run in the terminal window here. If you can see just at the top of the thing, that's the command that's running. But it's running in our complete application, so we need to change the folder. I've got a lot of folders going on here as we manage all the different versions. So we just run Sencha app watch modern, and that will tell Sencha command to watch the folders and build CSS as it goes, and make sure all the files are recognized by the thing. So we'll just run that and put it to one side. So what we're going to do is we're going to build it in this XMail folder. We can ignore the ones down here. They're ones from previous cafes, and this is the complete application that we're going to use for reference. So we've got the app launched here. As I said, there's some errors here because it's looking for classes that don't exist. So the first thing we're going to do is open the modern folder, and this is where all our modern toolkits files will live. And at the moment we've got a main class here which will mirror the classic toolkits main class. And in the app folder we have all our common codes. This is all the stores and models and some main view controllers and models that contain all of our data backing stuff that's going to back the views. So this is all stuff we've gone through in previous webinars. So if you want to get some detail on those, check back to the recordings that will hopefully be up soon, and you can see me talk through all of these. So we're just going to assume that that's all there, and I'll talk to things as we dip into what stuff that we've already done. So in our modern folder we have a main view, which is very basic. It's set up by default as a tab panel. What we're going to change that to is a navigation view, which is a special modern class, which is basically a container with a card layout, which gives us some nice sort of navigation animations as you move between cards. It also gives us a toolbar with a back button and a title and things as new cards get added. But we're actually going to remove those in our application. So we'll just set this up just now. So first thing we need to do, we've changed it to extend navigation view. We've got its default X type, and we're going to set full screen to true so that it becomes a full screen component. And we've already tied it to the view controller and the view model that we've got in our common code. So these two classes relate to this main model, and we've got our main controller base, but we're actually going to create a new modern version of the main controller. So let's call that main controller and add that in to start with. And what that's going to do is we're going to extend the base class, which is in the common code, and we're going to put any modern specific let's take that out for now, modern specific logic and business logic in here and build upon what's in the base class, so that hopefully we can share a lot of the business logic code in here, and then have the toolkit versions, subclasses, they will build upon it and modify anything that they need to modify where there's discrepancies between the frameworks, so the toolkits. So now we should have a main controller, and we're going to include that, or requires that in here. And we've got, I'll wrap it in quotes, and we've got, this is the alias that we've got set up here, so that should link it to there. So that should hopefully get rid of this error here and show us a navigation view, which is currently empty. So that's good. So now we've got at least something on screen. We're going to tackle the messages grid. So we're basically going to clone the sort of structure that we've got from the classic toolkit app, because it's, we're not changing the structure. The sort of all the components that we're going to make are basically the same, but the toolkits differ slightly, so the APIs are slightly different. So we need to create new components that make use of the modern features and modern APIs. So we're going to create a folder here called messages, and we're going to create a file called messages grid. And the modern toolkit has a really good grid component, which is is always being updated to try and get that feature parity with the classic toolkit, and it's it's really quite powerful at the moment. So I'm just going to copy in some code so that we can get a wee bit quicker. So we've got xdefine xml view messages grid. We've got an alias here, and we're extending the grid.grid component. In our classic toolkit, that was x.panel.grid. So slightly different sort of naming conventions, but that's the file we need to extend. And just like in the classic toolkit, we need columns to tell us what data to show on screen. So we're going to add a columns config. It takes an array of config objects for the column class, and this is very similar to the basics are very similar to the classic toolkit. So we give it a data index, and we're going to use first name as the index, which doesn't really matter. Oh no, so yeah, so we need first name. This first column is going to give us the little avatar thing. In this case, we're just going to set it to be the first letter of the first name, make it a circle, and give it a random color. And so I'll paste a lot of code in here because this isn't really detail that we really, it's not too interesting. I'll talk through it as we go. So we'll give it a width of 60, just so it's quite narrow. And this cell config lets us give some configuration to the cell itself. So we're going to say encode HTML false, because we want to, in our template, we're going to give it actually HTML. So we don't want that to be turned into, to be encoded so that it shows as as a string. So we want to show the actual HTML. And then we give it a template configuration, which is an array. The first item being the string, template string that we're going to use. So in this case, we've got just a div, got a class of avatar. We've got some inline styling for the background color, where we're going to call this get avatar color, pass in the first name, and it will give us a hex value back. And then inside that, I've got a span, where we take the first letter of the first name and make it uppercase. And then this get avatar color basically has an array of colors, 26 colors. It gets the index of the from the alphabet the first name's first character is, and then grabs that and outputs it as the background color. So dead simple there, and that gives us that circle with the person's first name initial in. So the second column, we're going to do the same again, data index. This time we're going to use subject, although we're going to create a sort of hybrid column where there's multiple different pieces of information. So we've got the full name at the top, the subject, and then a sort of snippet of the message. So again, we're going to use a custom template. So we need to use the cell config, because we're going to have the HTML put in directly, and we're going to make another template. And again, I'll just paste this template in. It's basically a template string with some classes. So we've got a wrapping div. We've got a top line div, which will have the name at one side and the date at the other. That will be a flex box, so the name stretches the full width and the date gets pushed to the right. And we call the date field, and we pass in this formatting syntax to format the date to the format that we want. And then two other divs with subject and message, and that is all we need. We want flex 1 because we want this column to be the widest, take up all the space that's available. And to go with that, so we've added a few CSS class names here. So we also need to create a SAS file for this. So we've got messages grid. So just mirror the component name and just have it alongside it. And we've got various CSS styles to put in. I'll just paste them in. So we've got the message grid is the overarching class that we've added at the top here, just so we can scope this a little bit. And we've got an avatar styling, which just makes a circle and centers the initial. And we've got an unread class, which will make everything bold. As you see here, all the unread messages have bold text. The top line container, we've given flexbox layout, and the name, we've bumped this font size up a bit. We've set the flex value, and we've given the subject and message some styling, so that because they're obviously very long strings, we want them to be truncated and have the ellipses that you can see at the end over here. So that all is fine, and we've got that messages grid in there. Right, so now we can add it to the main class and get it on screen. So first we're going to require the class so that we, the Sencha command always knows it's there. So view.messages grid, oops, make that correct. And then we can just give it an items array. And all these general patterns are very similar to the classic toolkit. The way we configure components, the way we set up items arrays, this sort of thing, it's all identical. It's just the APIs of the components that are slightly different. So we still use X types as before, and we give it a messages grid. And the navigation view has a card layer by default, which will just set this messages grid to be the full screen. But obviously we don't have a data store attached yet, so we need to add that. So we've got use the bind config again, and we want to bind the store property of the messages grid to the messages store that we configured and added to our main view model. So all that is there, and that's the code that's being shared between the classic toolkit and this new modern toolkit. So we don't have to, because we did that last week or in the previous weeks, this is already here, so we can just create the the visuals, and then bind it all together. So hopefully we will see our data grid. Very quick and easy to get that set up, because we've already got often the hardest part is getting all that data in and getting everything set up. That's because we've already done that with the classic, the toolkit. All we need to do is create a grid and configure some columns, and we've got it ready already. So we can see at the top we've got a column headers here, so we don't actually want them. Just looks a bit untidy because we don't really want the column headers there, so we're going to turn them off. Somehow remember how to do that. Oh, here we go. So we're going to add these configs to the grid here. So we don't want the title bar, we want hide headers true, and that should drop them off. So now we're in a good place. So now obviously clicking these doesn't do anything, but we want to be able to move from this screen to the message reader screen. So to do that, we need to handle the tap on each of these rows. So this is where we need to do a bit of refactoring of our classic toolkit app because of the difference in events that come out of this. So we're going to listen to the click on this modern toolkit grid, we want to listen to the child tap event. In the classic toolkit, we listen to the item click event, which has a slightly different signature to the child tap event. So what we need to do is we need to do a wee bit of refactoring to be able to share the common code or sort of normalize it so that the common code has a normalized interface that we can use in both toolkits. So to do that, we need to, first of all, we'll add a listener to here. So add listeners, and we'll go for the child tap event, and we'll set up an event handler called onMessageTap. And that string will be looked for in the main controller class. So we can add that here and give it a function. So the first parameter of this is a grid, and the next is a location parameter, which has a lot of data on the sort of tap itself. It tells you which grid cell it was in, which grid row, which record was clicked on, and that's the detail we want. We want to know the record. So if we jump back to the main controller base from before, we can see this message grid function, and it's got a different signature. So it's got a grid as the first parameter and message record as the second. And so that's not compatible with what we are getting out of the modern toolkit. So we're going to have to refactor this so that we can use the same logic here. This is the shared logic. We want to be able to show the compose window or set the selected message, but we want to be able to have a common interface for that. So what we need to do first is to refactor this this function. So we're going to take the bit we want, this sort of the main logic, and make it its own function. So we're going to call that handle message click, and we only need to worry about the message record. So we're just going to pass that in, and we're going to let each of the individual event handlers fill out the message record from wherever it lives. In the classic toolkits, that's from the second parameter. In the modern toolkit, that's the record property of the second parameter, which is slightly different data structure. So we're going to paste this in here, and now we can use this function in this toolkit specific controllers. So we're going to take this out of here from the base class, and we're going to drop it into the classics toolkits controller. So that's going to go here, and instead of calling this here, we can call the base class, which has got the handle message click function. We'll pass in the message record. So that will keep the functionality the same for the classic toolkit app, and now we can set up the modern toolkit app to call that function as well. So we call handle message click. Obviously the language is slightly different with clicks and taps and things, but I think generally click and tap can be used interchangeably in this instance. So all we need to do now is interrogate the location object and grab, sorry, not message, just record, and that will set the selected message property of the view model. And in the classic toolkit app, we are listening for that change, and then we're changing the UI based on the record becoming set. So we listen for that and we swap the cards over on the card layout and populate the reader view with the message details. So we're going to do something very similar here in the modern toolkit. So first we're going to override the init method of the controller, and what we're going to do here is we're going to hook into the view model, and we're going to bind to a change in the selected message. Need to wrap that in curlies, and we're going to pass in a message called unselected message change, and passing this so that the scope is the same as the controller, and then we're going to define that here. That gives us a message record. So in this scenario, when the message record, the selected message record changes, i.e. it's been clicked on, we want to create a view record and push it onto the navigation view, which will trigger the sliding animation and change the view from the list to the details. So in this handler, we're going to check for us if the selected message is present, because if it's being set to null, we obviously don't want to go to a view to view the details of it because it doesn't exist. So in this case, if it does have a thing, we're going to get the view, which is a navigation view, and we're going to push on a config object for that viewing component. So we're going to call a method that we'll make in a second called message details config, and we'll pass it the message record, and that will push that view onto the navigation view. And if we don't have a selected message, if you're changing it from being set to being unset, we want to pop the existing view off the top, because we assume that if we're setting it to null from a different value, we're already on a details view and we want to move back to the list view. So that's why we're going to do a pop there. And to fill out the last method, the get message details config, I'll paste it in and talk us through it. So all we're doing is we're taking the message record and we're returning a config object which will be added to the navigation view. So in this case, we're going to use the message reader component, which we'll talk about in a minute, because we're going to do some work with that. And we set the data property to the message records data. We don't want a header because we've already got a header for the main view, and we bind the title to the subject. But in fact, we're taking the header off, so we'll just take that away because we don't need that anymore. So that will, well, I'll give it if we refresh, it'll give us an error because wait a minute, this selected message. Let's change that. So if we tap that, we will get an error because it doesn't recognize message reader, because that class, although we have it in the project, it's part of the classic toolkit app. But what we're going to do is we're going to share that with both toolkits, because this is a very simple component. It's just got a template and extends a panel. So this is common to both toolkits. So that means we can share it, and that takes another piece of code that isn't going to be duplicated in two places and makes it common to both setups. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this folder out of the classic toolkit and we're going to drop it into the app/view folder and move that over, and that should now become available to us. And what we'll do is we'll just copy and paste the class name into the requires array so that we know we have it. I think I see Sencha command doing some work, so we'll just let that finish refreshing. And again, like I said at the start, if there's any questions that pop into your head, feel free to add them to the chat window and we can answer them. Right, so we're going to refresh now, and now we can click and we can see that message reader and component gets created. We get the nice slide animation from the navigation view, and the template gets populated with the common with the messages details that we had clicked on. So we got the date and the email address and that sort of thing. So that's really good. So now we've got a details record, but we can't go back. Oh, we can. There's a hidden button there, but we don't want to use that button. We want to add our own button, like we have here in this view here. So we want to have our own toolbar because we've got actions and things we want to add to there. So what we're going to do there is, in our classic toolkit app, we have our own messages toolbar, which has various actions and various buttons. So a lot of these are very, we want the same actions and we want basically the same layout. So, but we can't just copy and paste this one in here as we did with the reader class, because we're making use of a init component which doesn't exist in the modern toolkit. Although the structure of the components is very similar, the lifecycle hooks and things are slightly different. So instead of a init component, we can sort of replace it nearly one-to-one with a function called initialize, and it comes in a slightly different place in the lifecycle, but it lets us call setters and getters to update our component with things at runtime, which means we can call functions in the scope of the component, which is what we're doing here. So we're calling this make handler method, which is just giving us a function back which will fire an event, but we can't do that if we have it all in line. So what we have to do is use the initialize method. So we can either copy and paste this toolbar, and we could say change that to initialize, use the set items method and just be done with it, or we can share this code between both toolkits. And that's what we're going to do in this case, just to demonstrate how we might do that. So instead of having a messages toolbar, we're going to have a messages toolbar base class, and that's going to allow us to extend from and add functionality for each toolkit should we need to. So we're going to create a messages folder in the common app folder, and we're going to call this messages toolbar base. And what we're going to do with this is let's just copy and paste our classic toolkit thing code in. We'll give it, change it to base, and we're going to change the extend class from x.toolbar.toolbar, which is a classic only name, to x.toolbar, which is a common name between them both, and which is quite handy because a lot of components have alternative class names which you can make use of. And we're going to take the alias out because that needs to belong in the subclass. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called build items, and that's going to be a function that's just going to return a set of items for our toolbar. And in this case, it's going to be all these items here. We're just going to cut them out of the init component and paste them into here. And so that will return the items as we've set them up before, and we can drop the init component, and that becomes our base class. So now in the classic toolkit, we want to extend the base class now to our base, and the framework it'll first look for a class called this in the classic toolkit folder. If it doesn't find it, it'll move up to the common app folder and find it there. And now we've added our alias, and then we have our init component here. Instead of having this inline set of items, we're going to call the build items function. And that's just going to return a set of button configs, and we can use them in the assign them to the items property, and that will get them rendered. And we can take away that function because it's already in the parent. So now the classic toolkit should remain working as it did, and we can now create our own modern version of this in the modern folder. So we want to create a new file called messages toolbar, just the same name, and we paste it in here, and we can keep the same name as well because the modern and classic namespaces exist independently. So you can have duplicate names existing. And so instead of the init component, we're going to use the initialize, and we don't use x.apply, but we use x.set items, and that will call a setter, but we'll update the items array with the output of the build items function. And we call the call parent function as well, just to make sure everything gets set up properly. And now we can add this messages toolbar to the main view, just the same way we've done it elsewhere. So we add the requires for the messages toolbar, and we drop in the function, the config object. So in the classic toolkit, we want this toolbar to dock to the top. In the classic toolkit, we have an explicit docked items property, which any items that are in there are processed as docked items. But in the modern toolkit, we do it slightly differently. We add all the items to the items array, and we give each one that wants to be docked a docked property. You'll notice in the classic it's called dock to tell it where to put it, and then in the modern it's called docked with an ed in the end. So that's something that always catches me out. But any item in the items array which has a docked property set, it will be treated as a docked item and docked, according to the string value, where it's top, bottom, left, or right. So that's all we need to do there. And as before, because we're adding this message toolbar, we want to take away the navigation views built-in toolbar header bar. So we're going to set navigation bar false, just so we can use our own instead of this blue one that's here already. So let's refresh this. Let's see what we get. Okay, we get an error. So let's take that. So this is where we get a wee bit tricky. So there's some differences between the modern and classic toolkit. So this TV separator, which is just a vertical line, doesn't exist in the modern toolkit. So for our purposes, we're just going to take it out because it's not really necessary. It's just decoration, really. So that one can be shared, but everything else can. So these are all just buttons, and we've got a component at the bottom which gives us our message count. So now we have a toolbar with the refresh button, and obviously all the other ones that are message actions are hidden at the moment because we've got our hidden binding set, and we've got 15 messages in our inbox. And now if we click through to the next page, we see that the toolbar will update and give us the message specific ones. The archive, delete, mark as unread, and the back button. And the back button doesn't work just yet, so we need to hook that up. Because in the classic toolkit, the back button will set the selected message to null, I think, and trigger the swap. So we just need to make sure that's hooked up correctly. So what we need to do is we need to bind the event. So you remember here, these events are coming out of this toolbar components. We've got back, refresh, archive, but none of them are hooked up in our example yet because that is done in here. So what we need to do is hook up all these actions to their common base class handler functions. So we'll just drop this in here. So there's a refresh button, which you can probably see if I refresh, it's going to be there. So so we're going to hook up the refresh button, which is a click on the refresh button on the toolbar, and it's going to hook up to the refresh messages function that's part of the main controller that's bound to this, the view controller. Obviously, we didn't create that function because our view controller doesn't have that, but it's part of the base controller, which is our shared code between the two toolkits. So we're getting all this logic is all being shared between the two toolkits, which is really quite powerful because we're not writing any business logic here. We're just writing view configurations, really. We're not writing much code. We're just writing configs, which is because we've written all that code once already, and now we're just reusing it because we did it quite smartly in the first instance, thinking ahead this would be the case. and now we can make use of it and get this application done really fast because we don't have to write new code. So all of these functions are part of the base class. So now if we refresh, we should hopefully get them all hooked up. So if we hit refresh, we'll see a wee flash there. If we go to the network tab, we'll see a new messages call being done. If we click here, we've now got the back button working. The message is marked as unread now. Again, that's logic that's in the base view controller. It's not something we've written, but it's something we've got already from the logic that we've put in when we built the classic app. And likewise, we can delete messages. So we've got 14 instead of 15, and these are all updating as they should. We can mark that as unread, or we can archive it out of the inbox. So all that business logic has been written before in previous weeks, and now we're just making use of it again. So that gets us very far along, I think. We've got our messages grid. We can view the different messages, and we can trigger our actions and navigate between them, which I think is probably a good place to stop. And next week, what we'll do is we will set up the tree view to show our labels, and we will talk about the compose options. In fact, I just realized we've missed a column in our grid. So we've got a star and unstar button here. Let's put that in. We've got a wee bit of time. So let's go back to our messages grid. Apologies, we just jumped ahead too fast. So we're in our messages grid. We've got our columns arrays. We've got two at the moment. One which has the little avatar color, and one which has the main details. So we're going to add a third one, which is, in fact, it's not a third column. We're going to make use of something in the modern toolkit called tools, which can be added to grid cells to give little action hooks, similar to what you see in panels and windows and things. The tools in the corner of the header bar, so things like the minimize, maximize, close, they're all little tools. So we're going to add this config to the cell object here, and we're going to add a tools collection. That takes an object, and you can use keys for each one. So we're going to have a star one, and we're going to I'm just going to paste some stuff in. Again, we're going to hook into the logic and business logic that we've set up in the past for the classic toolkit. So we're going to use the same handler. We're going to use the same handler, eventually the same handler. This one actually we're going to handle locally and fire an event called star message, which we're doing in the grid, the messages grid in the classic toolkit as well. So we'll come to that in a minute. So we've got an icon class of star. Zone is end, so we can do start or end, and that pushes the tools to either side of the cell. And we're going to bind the hidden property to the record.starred. So in this case, if the star icon is a solid star, so if the record is not starred, then we hide it, and if it is starred, then we show it. And likewise, we're going to do the same with the unstar. It's very similar. We're using a star half all. Ideally, it would be a completely empty star, but there isn't one in Font Awesome. So we're just using this one as demo purposes. We probably have to add our own. And we've got the inverse of the binding here. So we've got record.starred, and here we've got not record.starred. So just one other thing we need to add to make this all work. We're using string method names, so we need to be able to set, we want those to be resolved to the scope of the component. So we need to set the default listener scope to true, and that will resolve those to methods in this component itself. We also need to give an item config, which is a config used for to configure the columns themselves. And we need to say view model true, and that allows the binding here to work to bind to the record for that grid row, rather than rather than going up the tree to find a view model. elsewhere. And finally, we're just going to add these star message and unstar message functions, which are very basic. All they do is fire an event called star message with the record that's being clicked on. And then in our main method, in our main our main component, we want to handle those two events that are getting fired out, and we want to pass them the view controller methods that we've got in our base class. So that should hopefully show us so that's the unstarred state with the half thing, and if we click it, it'll go solid, so it's showing the other tool. So the first one's now got the star item, and the other one's got the unstar, and then we toggle them on and off like that. So that's a good wee feature of the grid, is that those tools, which doesn't exist in Classic. We maybe would use an action column. In fact, I think we use an action column in the Classic toolkit, so that's just the alternative for there, to add some little actions to each cell or each row. So it's quite useful. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there, I think. If there's any questions, please put them into the chat. As I said, I'll hopefully get this app uploaded later today onto my website, so you can browse it. If you open it up in normal mode, then you'll see the Classic toolkit. If you open it up with the dev tools and the device emulator feature enabled, it'll take you to the modern app, and you can see the different ones. So thank you very much for coming along this morning. Hopefully you've had some good info, and as I said, any questions, just give me a shout either just now, or if you've got them, think of something later, you can email me, and that's fine. I can take a look.
Brilliant, thanks, Stuart. Just one quick question that's popped through here. You mentioned obviously using there the font awesome to get the icon up. Are you able to use any other font sets that you've got or have access to use the kind of the tools part of the grid there?
Yeah, so if you've got another icon library font that you like to use, you can just you can load it on your page as you would normally do, load it into the document, and those classes will be available to use in here. So I don't know any others off the top of my head, but if it's called, Stuart's icon, you just do it like that, and in the same way, and you could use those classes as long as they, assuming they render in a similar sort of manner where they're, creating a pseudo element or whatever. They can be used there. The alternative for the tools is there are some built-in ones you can use with the type value config, and there's various ones. Let me just grab the docs and I can show you. So grid cells, tools. Go to here. So there's various built-in ones. So there we are. So there's type refresh, type search, type help. So if we use one of those, it'll give us a built-in one. Sorry, I need to actually start. So there's one built-in. That's using the built-in icons in the framework. It's not using font awesome. So if you didn't want to use font awesome at all, there's other options.
Super. Another option here is instead of using fonts in there, would you be able to put a small image or something?
Good question. I'm not sure. I'm sure you can somehow. It maybe isn't.
I guess the other option would just be to you could always use a column with this, to render whatever you want into it, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could make its own dedicated column and have render an image there and handle the click like you would normally handle like a row click, and determine what cell was in, and handle the action that way. That would definitely be an option.
Yeah, I just opened up the font awesome and I was having a quick look, and there's I think we need to get an email client for the space industry or something, and use the fun Starship icons, or the Starship Fighter one. We could do the Star Wars edition of Gmail with the
Yeah.
click it twice if you get a TIE Fighter. No, brilliant. A couple of others. It looked really, really cool, especially kind of seeing all that business logic just immediately start working with the additional view popping up. You know, it really does show the power of having the business logic written out using the model view model kind of approach, and having the being able to just kind of plumb that existing business logic into a new UI works very, very quickly. It was very, very cool. Okay, I don't see any kind of other major questions that have popped through, things that you haven't already covered. So let's wrap it up there. So thank you everybody for being with us today. I hope you enjoy your week. Wish you all the best in your coding, and look forward to seeing you next week so we can complete through the next part of this example.
Great. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Stephen.
Cheers, everyone. Take care. Happy coding. Bye.